galaxy. And the inconsistencies and the paradoxes created by such technology, well, the writers never really deal with those. In reality, what the writers are doing is creating plot devices to advance their stories. Do these plot devices have anything to do with reality? Well, the famous science fiction author Isaac Asimov was a respectable scientist as well. He wrote a critique on the scientific accuracy of Star Trek. And Gene Roddenberry, the producer, actually felt the need to defend his program. And Roddenberry and Asimov, what did they argue about? Well, we're not sure about the detail because the article that Asimov wrote was retracted because he became friends with Roddenberry. But it's likely that what they did argue about was that it would take thousands of years to cross the shortest spans of interstellar space. And Roddenberry was asking, how would you write that into a weekly TV series? Take the fantastic antimatter-powered warp drive engines, for instance. Apparently in the story, these engines operate by warping space around them as predicted by Einstein's general theory of relativity. Well, that's close to figuring out how it works. And space does warp, but it needs huge amounts of mass. And our sun is millions of times heavier than the Earth, and that only bends space by a tiny fraction of a degree near its surface. We need the enormous gravitational mass of a black hole to make a significant bend in space. The point is, you shouldn't confuse what we see in popular cinema and television with what's actually feasible. Actually, there is one other point on this matter. So you may say, well, we know so much about physics, maybe something will pop up. But if you actually look back at how science evolves, the indicators for our current space program actually go back a really long way. So Aristarchus from ancient Greece, he hypothesised that the sun might be a star, like all the other stars, but it's just a bit closer. Copernicus started to understand what orbits were about. Bruno was burnt at the stake for suggesting there were other worlds out there, and there may be other inhabitants. The physics of spaceflight has its basis in the work of Galileo and Newton. Newton even did some calculations to size up what sort of reaction drive, and it was a cannon, because that's what they knew back in those days, but he worked out how much power was needed to put a mass into orbit. The technology for chemical rocketry goes back to the ancient Chinese and the invention of gunpowder. So in fact, our current space program is the culmination of 1,000 years of knowledge and physics, and physics has been around for a few hundred years. So it's not as if we now have some other knowledge that's going to usurp the way we currently do space. If Star Trek type technology was even possible, and that is a big if, it will probably not come about as quickly as we might think. Okay, so I'm just going to touch on a bit of what Len was talking about the cost. So you've probably all seen the International Space Station on television. It's performed some science and technology tasks and it's been testbed for various technologies. But we can also use it as a benchmark for what's involved in putting a permanent independent presence into space. First, the space station is in low Earth orbit, so it's actually at the lower end of the cost per kilogram scale. If we want to go any further than that, we need larger class of rockets like the Saturn V's used in Apollo missions. The space station can accommodate 6 people on a permanent basis, and even so it took 100 flights and more than 10 years to construct. And it still needs spacecraft to continuously fly, so it's not independent in any way. Okay, so what would we need if we wanted to go to an independent presence in space? Well, we need to build space colonies. And as we said before, independent colonies are what's required to get around that single point of failure for the Earth. Such colonies have been proposed and discussed by scientists since before the space program started in the 60s. They'd be gigantic structures, initially located at stable points between the Earth and the Moon. They'd have to be spun up to rotate so as to create artificial gravity, and they'd support tens of thousands of inhabitants. So such colonies would have to include their own infrastructure, transportation systems, manufacturing plants, health services, educational organisations, and so on. And for expanding a space presence, the colonies would need to have sufficient infrastructure to build their own colonies as well. So above all, to be independent of the Earth, such colonies will have to have facilities for mining asteroids, comets and various moons, because they will contain the resources that we need. So what would it take to start a process like this? I should have a second, a couple of slides there just to give you a feel for it if you haven't seen this before. So that's what they look like inside. So they're absolutely huge. So what would it take? Well, as I said, if we use the International Space Station as a benchmark, which only supports 6 people, and we're talking about getting tens of thousands up there, well, maybe we'd need 10 times as many launches as we did for the International Space Station. That might be a pretty optimistic sort of estimate. Maybe we need 10 times as many again. Maybe we're talking about 1,000 heavy lift launches, or maybe 10,000 heavy lift launches. And if we go at the rate of about 10 a year, we're talking about a program that goes between 100 years to 1,000 years. And as we've been alluding, that'd be a miraculous commitment to life, wouldn't it? Can we afford it? And one always has to look at the bottom line. So just on this graph here, this is taken out of the Orkstone report, which was one done for George Bush's administration. The current space program sits around here, which is around 1% of the federal budget for the US, just to use the US as a benchmark. And the US space program is struggling at that level. But really, to get the heavy lift launches that we're talking about, we'd have to be operating up here, somewhere at the Apollo 11, to the top scale, somewhere around the 5.5% to 6% of the US federal budget, to sort of, and we have to do it continually, not just a peak. We have to keep going. And we have to do that for something like 100 to 1,000 years. So just to summarise this little bit of what we've been talking about, our point, we're not naysayers, but rather we want to emphasise that access to space is difficult, and the difficulty sets the bar and becomes our challenge. What I've got here is we're summarising the levels of difficulty. So going from the Virgin Galactic suborbital, which is the easiest things to do, which is why industry is doing it, down to the hardest, which is the independent space presence. And in between, we've got the other bits of the program. Actually, what we've done is we've gone into Earth orbit, we've done expeditions. If you look on the right part of that table, single nations can work in single nation or multinational type organisations working together can achieve this. But when we get down to colonisation and independent space presence, we really need to see collaboration, international collaboration on a level we've never seen before.
That was the longest section. Number 2 is what's called the Fermi Paradox. Now, why have we been making such a fuss about space travel being difficult for us? Well, maybe it's not just us. Maybe space travel is intrinsically difficult for any intelligent entity anywhere in the universe. We don't yet have any evidence, either direct or indirect, that space is teeming with life. And we are yet to observe the cosmos buzzing with pan-galactic communities of intelligent beings. Are we the only intelligent life in the universe? Since 1960, we have been attempting to find signs of extraterrestrial intelligence by listening for radio signals from space. Over the years, this has become known as the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or the SETI program. But space is huge, and the universe has been around for a very long time. Surely there must be someone out there. Nice picture. What that shows is that we've only actually been searching a very little area of our own galaxy. So the little green guys, or whatever you want to imagine them as, they might be here. We're just not looking there at the moment. Well, there's a whole bunch of points on this slide, but we've focused on the 2 pink ones, or purple ones. There are a whole lot of reasons as to why they're not there, or they might not be there, but maybe the first one, there are fewer intelligent species in the universe than we estimate. Life is rare. We may be it. And down the bottom, we know already getting to space is much harder than we think. If it's true for us here with the physics we know, then maybe it's difficult for everybody. There's always a good one in the middle.